In this video, we'll explore autoencoders, a deep learning AI model that compresses data to capture the essentials and then reconstructs it back to its original form. Let's understand the concept of an autoencoder with an example. Imagine you have a book. If you summarize that book into a few pages and the summary captures the key points well, then a book reconstructed from that summary will be very similar to the original. On the other hand, if the summary is poor or misses important details, the reconstructed book can be quite different from the original. Similarly, an autoencoder is a deep learning model that efficiently compresses data into a summary and learns to reconstruct the original data as accurately as possible from that compressed form. One method to compress data is principal component analysis. PCA is a widely used unsupervised learning technique for reducing the dimensionality of large datasets. As shown in this slide, suppose we have a dataset with n samples and p features, represented as an n by p matrix. PCA can reduce the number of features from p to k, where k is smaller than p. For example, if the data has 10 features, PCA can reduce them to 2 features. Importantly, PCA doesn't simply select a subset of the original features. Instead, it performs a linear transformation to create new features, such as Z1 and Z2, thereby reducing dimensionality. Therefore, PCA is a mathematically based linear technique and is classified as a feature extraction method that transforms existing features into new ones. If principal component analysis is a mathematical linear technique, then an autoencoder can be seen as a deep learning-based, nonlinear method. An autoencoder is a model that learns important features by first compressing the input data and then reconstructing it. Since it learns using only the input data, without any labeled outputs, it is categorized as unsupervised learning. As shown in the diagram below, the structure of an autoencoder is simple: an encoder that compresses the data and reduces its dimensions, a latent space or latent vector that holds the compressed information, and a decoder that reconstructs the data back to its original form. To explain in more detail, as shown in the diagram below, an autoencoder is a nonlinear structure based on artificial neural networks. First, high-dimensional input data passes through the encoder, which creates a reduced dimensional latent space. Then, based on the information in this latent space, the decoder reconstructs the data back to its original dimensions. During this process, the model learns by minimizing the difference between the input and the output, effectively capturing the important features. So, the latent space plays a crucial role in an autoencoder. If the latent vector effectively captures the information of the input data X, then the reconstructed output X prime produced by the decoder will be very similar to X. In other words, the autoencoder non-linearly compresses the essential features of the input data into the latent vector. When the input is normal data, these latent vectors tend to cluster or distribute similarly within the latent space. However, when abnormal data is input, the latent vectors appear in different or unusual regions. This property can be utilized for applications such as anomaly detection, recommendation systems, and noise reduction. An autoencoder can also be used for anomaly detection. For example, imagine 3 input values, X, fed into the autoencoder, producing 3 corresponding outputs, X prime, as shown in the diagram below. By calculating the sum of the squared differences between each input and its output, we can measure the reconstruction error. If this error exceeds a predetermined threshold, the data is considered abnormal or an anomaly. In this case, the threshold is set to 5, and since the error for the third data point is greater than 5, it is flagged as an anomaly. In an autoencoder, the decoder takes the latent vector as input to reconstruct or generate data. Therefore, by inputting a new vector into the latent space, the decoder can create corresponding new data. Because of this, autoencoders can be considered a type of generative AI. When MNIST data is input into an autoencoder and the latent space is visualized in 2 dimensions, digits of the same kind tend to cluster closely together. This shows that similar data points have similar distributions even in the latent space. For example, the orange cluster here represents the digit 1, and if you place a new vector inside this orange area, the decoder will reconstruct an image resembling the digit 1. Because of this property, autoencoders have the potential to generate new data and are sometimes considered part of generative AI. However, the light blue cluster for digit 9 and the gray cluster for digit 7 overlap in the latent space. Decoding a vector located between 7 and 9 may produce an ambiguous image blending features of both digits. Moreover, autoencoders typically generate images similar to the input data, limiting their ability to create entirely new images. To overcome these limitations, more advanced generative models like variational autoencoder and generative adversarial network have been developed.